My daughter left me when her mother told lies about me. Now, after 1.5 years, she is back to ask for help in raising her child. I, 48M, am a divorcee living with my adult daughter, Renee, 22F. My ex-wife, 46F, lives with her new husband. I want to give some backstory to explain how we got here. 7 years ago, when Renee was 15, I discovered that my then-wife was having an affair with a younger man. It started when she began working late hours at her new job. At first, I didn't think much of it. She said she was trying to impress her new boss and establish herself in the company. I supported her, even though it meant I was left alone to take care of Renee most evenings. After a few months, I noticed changes in her behavior. She became distant and was always on her phone, smiling at text messages. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off, saying it was work-related. I started to feel uneasy, but I tried to trust her. One day, I decided to surprise her at work with lunch. When I arrived at her office, her co-workers told me she had left early. I called her, but she didn't answer. Worried, I drove around looking for her. That's when I saw her car parked outside a hotel. My heart sank. I waited in my car, hoping I was wrong. An hour later, I saw her exit the hotel with a man who looked about 10 years younger than her. They kissed before parting ways. I felt like my world had shattered. When she came home that night, I confronted her. At first, she denied everything, but when I told her what I had seen, she broke down and admitted to the affair. She said she felt neglected and unappreciated, and this man made her feel young and desired again. I was devastated. I had always thought we had a good marriage, and I couldn't believe she would betray me like this. I couldn't tolerate this betrayal. The trust was broken, and I knew I couldn't continue in the marriage. I filed for divorce soon after. It was a difficult time for all of us, especially Renee. She was caught in the middle, confused and hurt by the sudden breakdown of her family. After the divorce, I got custody of Renee, and my ex-wife moved out. She married the man she had the affair with about a year later. Since then, I've avoided any contact with her. The pain and anger were too much for me to handle. Renee, however, continued to see her mother. At first, it was just occasional visits, but over time, they started meeting once or twice a month. I never stopped her from seeing her mother, as I didn't want to put her in the middle of our issues. Over the years, I noticed Renee becoming more distant from me. She'd come home from visits with her mother in a strange mood, sometimes argumentative or cold towards me. I suspected my ex-wife was telling her things about me, but I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. Recently, Renee started dating a guy named Jake, 24M. From the moment I met him, I had a bad feeling about him. He seemed disrespectful and had a cocky attitude. He'd make mean remarks about my job and my hobbies, and I noticed he'd roll his eyes when I spoke. I tried to give him a chance for Renee's sake, but I couldn't shake off my dislike for him. I expressed my concerns to Renee, telling her that I thought Jake wasn't treating her or our family with respect. She brushed off my worries, saying I was being overprotective and that Jake was just joking around. I didn't push the issue, but I made it clear that I wasn't comfortable with him. Last week, Renee went to visit her mother as usual. When she came back, she seemed stressed. She started an argument with me about Jake. She accused me of trying to control her life and said I was just like her mother described me, manipulative and selfish. I was shocked. I asked her what her mother had been telling her about me. Renee said that her mother told her I had been controlling and emotionally abusive during their marriage, and that's why she had sought comfort elsewhere. She said her mother warned her that I would try to sabotage her relationships because I couldn't stand to see her happy and independent. I was furious. These were all lies, and I couldn't believe my ex-wife would stoop so low as to poison our daughter against me. I told Renee that her mother was lying and explained my side of the story again. I reminded her of how her mother's affair had torn our family apart. Renee wouldn't listen. She accused me of trying to turn her against her mother and said she was tired of being stuck in the middle of our drama. She then brought up Jake again, saying that if I couldn't accept him, then maybe I didn't accept her. I tried to explain that my issues with Jake had nothing to do with my problems with her mother. I told her I was just worried about her and wanted to make sure she was with someone who respected her. But Renee was too angry to listen. She said she was an adult and could make her own decisions about who to date. The argument escalated, with both of us saying hurtful things. Finally, Renee shouted that she was done with my controlling behavior. She stormed off to her room and started packing a bag. I followed her, trying to calm her down, but she pushed past me. She said she was going to stay with Jake for a while and that she needed space from me. Before I could say anything else, she was out the door, leaving me alone and heartbroken. It's been a few days now and Renee still hasn't come home. She's not answering my calls or messages. I'm worried sick about her and feeling guilty about our fight. I keep replaying the argument in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently. I never wanted to come between Renee and her mother, despite how I feel about my ex-wife. And I certainly never meant to drive Renee away. I was just trying to protect her and be a good father. But now, I'm alone in this house, missing my daughter, and wondering if I've ruined our relationship forever. I can't help but feel angry at my ex-wife for telling Renee these lies about me. I feel like she's manipulating our daughter to get back at me. At the same time, I'm questioning myself. Am I really being controlling? Is my dislike for Jake unreasonable? Should I have kept my concerns to myself? I'm at a loss for what to do now. I want to reach out to Renee, but I'm afraid of pushing her further away. I want to confront my ex-wife about her lies, but I don't want to make things worse for Renee. I'm considering seeking family therapy, hoping it might help us communicate better and heal our relationship. I love my daughter more than anything, and the thought of losing her is killing me. I've always tried to be a good father, but now I'm not sure if I've failed. Am I a bad guy for not accepting Renee's boyfriend and causing her to leave home? Should I have handled things differently? How can I fix this and bring my daughter back home? Update. It's been a year and a half since I last posted about my daughter Renee leaving home after our fight about her boyfriend Jake. A lot has happened since then, and I wanted to share an update. For the first few months after Renee left, I tried reaching out to her regularly. I called, texted, and even wrote her letters. Most of my attempts went unanswered. When she did respond, it was with short, cold messages telling me she needed space. It was a painful time, and I felt like I had lost my daughter completely. I threw myself into work and tried to keep busy, but the house felt empty without Renee. I considered selling it and moving, but I couldn't bring myself to let go of the home where we had so many memories. As time passed, I heard bits and pieces about Renee's life through mutual acquaintances. I learned that she had moved in with Jake and was working at a local coffee shop. I wanted to visit her at work, just to see how she was doing, but I was afraid of pushing her further away. 6 months after she left, Renee sent me a text on my birthday. It was just a simple happy birthday, but it gave me hope that maybe one day we could reconcile. I responded, thanking her and telling her I missed her. She didn't reply, but I felt it was a small step in the right direction. A few more months went by with minimal contact. Then, about a year after she left, I ran into Renee at the grocery store. She was visibly pregnant. The encounter was awkward and tense. She told me she was expecting a baby with Jake, due in a couple of months. I congratulated her, though my heart was heavy. She was having a baby, and I had missed out on so much of her life. We made stilted small talk for a few minutes before parting ways. After that encounter, I sent Renee a message telling her that despite our differences, I would always be there for her if she needed me. She replied with a simple thank you. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. Then, last night, everything changed. I received a call from Renee around 9 p.m. When I answered, I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. My heart immediately started racing, worried about what could have happened. Through her sobs, Renee told me that she had a 3-month-old baby now, a little girl named Lily. But Jake, her boyfriend, had been abusive. She said it started with verbal abuse and controlling behavior shortly after she moved in with him. It escalated to physical abuse during her pregnancy. She had been too ashamed and scared to reach out for help. Renee went on to say that Jake had left her 2 weeks ago. He'd packed his bags and disappeared, leaving her alone with the baby. She was struggling to cope, both emotionally and financially. She couldn't work because she had no one to watch Lily, and she was quickly running out of money for rent and basic necessities. As I listened to my daughter pour out her pain and fear, I felt a mix of emotions. I was angry at Jake for hurting my little girl, heartbroken that Renee had been suffering alone, and guilty that I hadn't been there to protect her. But I also felt a pang of anger. After all, she had chosen to leave me and believe her mother's lies. When Renee finished talking, she asked if she could come home. She said she had nowhere else to go and didn't know what to do. I was silent for a moment, processing everything she had told me. Then I asked her if she had talked to her mother about this situation. Renee's voice cracked as she told me that she had gone to her mother first. She said her mom had listened to her story, then told her she was too busy with her new family to take on Renee and a baby. Her mother had suggested she look into women's shelters or welfare programs. Renee said she felt betrayed and abandoned by the person who had convinced her to cut ties with me. I felt a surge of anger towards my ex-wife. How could she turn her back on our daughter in her time of need? But I also felt conflicted about my own response. Part of me wanted to immediately tell Renee to come home, to protect her and help her like I always had. But another part of me was hesitant. I told Renee that I needed some time to think about it. I explained that while I loved her and was concerned for her well-being, her leaving had hurt me deeply. I said I wasn't sure if I was ready to have her back in my life so suddenly, especially with the added responsibility of a baby. Renee's sobs grew louder. She begged me to reconsider, saying she had no one else to turn to. She apologized for believing her mother's lies and for the things she had said to me before she left. She promised things would be different this time. I felt torn. I knew Renee was in a desperate situation, and the thought of my daughter and granddaughter struggling alone broke my heart. But I also worried about falling back into old patterns. What if she left again once things got better? What if she still resented me deep down? I told Renee I would call her back in the morning after I'd had some time to think things through. I assured her that I wasn't abandoning her, but that I needed to consider what bringing her and the baby into my home would mean for all of us. After we hung up, I couldn't sleep. I paced around the house, weighing my options. On one hand, Renee was my daughter, and she needed me. This could be a chance to rebuild our relationship and be there for my granddaughter. On the other hand, I was still hurt from before, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to open myself up to potentially being hurt again. As the sun came up, I still hadn't made a decision. I knew I needed to call Renee soon, but I was paralyzed by indecision. Part of me felt like a terrible father for not immediately taking her in, while another part felt justified in being cautious. Now, as I sit here writing this update, I'm still unsure what to do. I love my daughter, and I want to help her, but I'm scared of being hurt again. I don't know if I'm being selfish or prudent. I'm torn between my instinct to protect my child and my need to protect myself. Should I put aside my reservations and bring them home? Or am I right to take some time to think it through? I could really use some advice on how to handle this situation. Update. It's been a week since my last update when my daughter Renee called me crying about her situation with her abusive ex-boyfriend and their baby. I wanted to share what happened after that difficult phone call. After a sleepless night, I called Renee back the next morning as promised. I told her I needed to see her in person to discuss the situation. We agreed to meet at a local cafe that afternoon. When I arrived at the cafe, I saw Renee sitting at a corner table, cradling a small bundle in her arms. As I approached, I got my first glimpse of my granddaughter, Lily. She was tiny and perfect, with a tuft of dark hair peeking out from under her blanket. My heart melted at the sight of her. Renee looked exhausted and scared. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and she seemed much thinner than when I last saw her. We sat in awkward silence for a few moments before I started to speak. I told Renee that I had thought long and hard about her request to move back home. I explained that while I loved her and wanted to help, I was still hurt by what had happened between us. I said I was willing to let her and Lily move in, but I had some conditions that needed to be met. First, I told her that if she came to live with me, she would need to cut off all contact with her mother. I explained that I couldn't have someone in my home who was in regular contact with the person who had lied about me and damaged our relationship. Renee nodded, saying she understood and that she had no desire to speak to her mother after being turned away in her time of need. Second, I made it clear that under no circumstances would Jake, her ex-boyfriend, be allowed in my home or near Lily. I said that if he ever came back and tried to contact her, she needed to tell me immediately so we could take appropriate action to protect her and the baby. Renee agreed readily to this, saying she never wanted to see Jake again after how he had treated her. Third, I told Renee that while I was happy to help her get back on her feet, this arrangement couldn't be permanent. I said that once Lily was a bit older, Renee would need to look for a job to support herself and her child. I offered to help with childcare when she was ready to start working. Renee agreed to this as well, saying she wanted to be independent and provide for her daughter. Lastly, I said that we would need to attend family therapy together. I explained that we had a lot of issues to work through, and I thought having a professional to guide us would be beneficial. Renee hesitated at this, but ultimately agreed. After laying out these conditions, I asked Renee if she could agree to them all. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said yes. She apologized again for everything that had happened and promised to do better this time. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I reached across the table and took Renee's hand, telling her that we would get through this together. Then I asked if I could hold Lily. As Renee carefully passed the baby to me, I felt a surge of love for my granddaughter. I knew in that moment that I had made the right decision. We left the cafe and went back to my house, our house now. I helped Renee bring in her things and the baby supplies. It was a bit chaotic at first, trying to figure out where everything would go and how to set up the nursery in the spare room. But as we worked together, I felt the tension between us start to ease. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of Lily crying and Renee soothing her, I reflected on how much had changed in just 24 hours. I knew we had a long road ahead of us. There would be challenges and difficult conversations. We still had a lot of healing to do. But I also felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. I had my daughter back, and now I had a beautiful granddaughter to love as well. I was determined to make this work, to be the father and grandfather they both needed. In the days that followed, we settled into a routine. Renee was an attentive mother, and I enjoyed helping with Lily when I could. We had our first therapy session, which was emotional but productive. We both committed to working on our communication and rebuilding our trust in each other. Renee has been respectful of the conditions I set. She blocked her mother's number and hasn't tried to contact her. She's also started looking into job training programs for when Lily is a bit older. I can see she's really trying to make things work. There are still moments of tension and awkwardness between us. We're both learning how to navigate this new dynamic. But there are also moments of joy, like when Lily smiled for the first time, or when Renee and I managed to have a long, honest conversation without arguing. I know we have a long way to go, but I'm glad I made the decision to give Renee and Lily a home. It won't be easy, but family is worth the effort. I'm committed to being there for both of them and to healing our relationship one day at a time. Thank you to everyone who offered advice and support through this difficult journey. Your words helped me find the strength to make this decision and work towards reconciliation with my daughter.